Hi, this is Mike from Mike's Unboxing Reviews and How To, and this is the Powermatic 2 electronic cigarette injector. Keep watching to find out more. Okay, so if you're a smoker, you probably noticed that the prices for your habit are skyrocketing, and as with most things in life, it's nice to do things a little bit cheaper and also kind of know what's going into your cigarettes. So this brings forward the Powermatic 2 cigarette injector. Now this machine is designed to be used with make your own filters or cigarette tubes and the tobacco of your choice. Now in this particular case I'm using a particular brand, but obviously the brands aren't important. Some people tend to use these if they grow their own tobacco leaves and cure them, etc, etc. Or if, like me, you want to save money on tobacco and you'd rather buy rolling tobacco, but you don't like using the normal Rizzlers and that kind of thing and the little filters, and you want to have a more kind of elegant approach, then this is the perfect machine for you. So I'm going to take you through the steps of how to make or inject a cigarette, and it's kind of like a routine or like a ritual that you can do. Everyone's going to have their own little ways of doing it or preferential ways of doing it. So I'm going to show you how I do it, and you may agree, you may not agree, but at least I'll be able to show you how the machine works and how I use it. So the first thing I'm going to need to do is to get my tobacco and shred it a little bit so it's ready to be used in the machine. So let's start with that. Okay, so like I said before, these kind of things are like a ritual, so everyone has their own ways of doing it. And like I said, this is going to be my way of doing it. So what I tend to do is to buy my tobacco, and when I get it, put it into a metal tin or something that is relatively airtight. And it's also quite handy because this is a relatively messy process. So at least you can use the tin to put all the loose bits and all the debris in. So what you want to do is, depending on your tobacco, now because the machine is an injector and it basically stuffs the cigarette tubes, you want your tobacco to be not too moist. So if you generally have a very moist tobacco, then you maybe want to shred it a little bit and leave it with the tin open for maybe an hour or so just to let it dry out a little bit. The tobacco I've got here is actually pretty much falling apart anyway, so this is relatively dry, so this won't need much shredding. So all I'm going to do is very lightly just shred some of this tobacco ready to go into the machine. Now somebody asked me previously when I did the unboxing on this machine, kind of like the whys and wherefores and how many cigarettes you can make. Now it is completely different for every type of tobacco, and also depending on the I guess to some extent the cigarette tubes you use. Now these are the standard kind of make your own, I think it's actually by Rizzler, I'm not entirely sure who makes them, but again I'll put some links in the description so you can see where I'm getting them from. So if for some weird reason you want to do exactly what I'm doing, then you can pretty much copy me completely. So that is the tobacco pretty much shredded. Now you don't want to shred it into tiny little pieces because then it has a tendency to fall apart in the tubes, and when you're smoking it, it tends to kind of drop out, which you don't want. You want it to have some kind of cohesion or moisture to it so that it bonds together a little bit so it smokes properly. Again, this is a very subjective thing. People have their varying rituals and ways of making their cigarettes, etc., and they like to do it how they like to do it, which I completely get and I completely understand. Kath, my wife, makes these as well, and her way of making it is slightly different from my way of making it, and we both disagree on how it should be done, but it's just something that I get used to doing, and I have a certain way of doing it, so there you go. So that's the tobacco relatively loosely shredded. So let's get rid of some of these loose pieces. Again, it's nice and easy to scrape it into the tin. I normally do have like a wooden tray for all of this to sit on, so I can just move it around to wherever I am to make the cigarettes. But I wanted to get rid of that for this particular video, just so you can get a better idea of what's going on. So that is the tobacco ready. So the next thing to do is get the machine ready. So the machine itself requires a figure 8 power, which plugs into a UK socket. Obviously, depending where you buy yours from, yours may be slightly different. We'll get to use that in a little bit. So let's run through quickly what the machine's got on it. So on the side, there is a collection area which collects debris from the tobacco, and also the cigarettes, when they're loaded, can drop into there. Now that is the kind of like the tip end or the fastening area. You've got a lever to actuate the motors and to kind of compress the tobacco. You've also got lights on the side, so a power on light and a jam light. Now if you're using tobacco which is too moist, or you're putting it too thick or too condensed, it will get gummed up in the machine and you will create a jam. Now it's relatively easy to fix that. It comes with a range of tools and sort of pokers, so you can poke all the bits out that are jammed. Obviously make sure you disconnect any electricity before you do that kind of thing. But you will get to a kind of point where you get just the right kind of consistency for your tobacco, and your tubes and everything works great. So you probably won't see the jam light very often, if at all, once you get used to it. Moving around to the back, saying there is just a power connection and an on-off switch, and that essentially is pretty much it. So looking at the top, there is actually like a guide, and on the top it's got some basic instructions. It says always distribute the tobacco evenly across the chamber, never overfill by applying excessive force. Okay, it's pretty much straightforward, but I guess they've got to put it on there. So you can get an idea of how it works. So when the lever is up, in the up position, when there's a tobacco tube on there, you put the tobacco into this section here, lower the lever, that compresses the tobacco and cuts off any stragglers, and then the motor will then inject the tobacco from that area into the tube. So we've done enough talking about it, let's get it done. So I normally have 2 boxes of these tubes, so one which is empty to put the cigarettes into, and one box with new fresh tubes, as you can see. Now those, again, you can pick up quite cheaply on places like Amazon or tobacconists, that kind of thing. Most places tend to sell them nowadays. So what you do is you get your tube and you put it on the end of the machine there. So that's ready to take tobacco. So now what we want to do is put some tobacco into the tube, into the machine. So you can kind of gauge it for yourself, depending how thick or how much tobacco you like in your cigarettes. So I'm going to do a relatively lightly packed cigarette. And then all you do once you've got it in there is move the lever down. I do it a couple of times just to cut the tobacco, and there we go, simple as that. So the tobacco has now been pushed from the tube inside there into this tube. Now it doesn't always go right the way to the end, so we tend to just tap them down a little bit, a couple of times on the table, and that makes sure that the tobacco goes right to the end of the cigarette filter, and there's a little bit left at the end where it's empty, but it's not a bad thing. If you're rolling your own cigarettes, like with Rizlas and filters, I think you'd struggle to get a product as neat as that and to make it look like a cigarette as much as that. And if you feel along the cigarette itself, it does feel like it's packed pretty much all the way along. Again, personal preference, you can pack it as much or as little as you like. Obviously, if you don't put a lot in, it's going to burn a lot quicker, and it's going to burn a lot quicker. If you put more in, it's going to be harder to smoke, and you will find the right balance for your preference of smoking. So there's one done. So literally it's just a case of rinse and repeat. So I'll go ahead and do another. So you put your tube on, get your tobacco, shred it out a little bit more if it's a little bit still damp, or a little bit, push it into the chamber. Now you don't want to stuff it in the chamber, but you do want to push it in to make sure it's actually in there. Then again, put the lid down. Now that time you actually heard it did strain a little bit. Again, that's because the tobacco is still a little bit moist, so it was struggling to get it down the tube. And in this case, it's not actually injected it fully. So yeah, the tobacco is still a bit damp, so that one's a bit of a dud. But again, if you tap it down, and just pinch the end, and there we go, not too bad. Again, the tobacco I'm using is a little bit too damp for this. I should have waited really, but again, even though that one technically was a dud, it still turned out okay, and the main thing of this is you're doing it yourself, you know what you're putting into the cigarettes, and also you're keeping the costs right down, because obviously rolling tobacco is much, much cheaper than buying a pack of cigarettes ready-made. So you can save yourself an absolute fortune. So this has been the Powermatic 2 electronic cigarette injector. Hopefully this has been useful for you to see how it actually works and what it does. If you've got any questions or comments, then please feel free to put them in the section below, and give me a like as well, just for actually going through this procedure on camera, which isn't the easiest of things to do. So I've been Mike, this is Mike's Unboxing Reviews Now 2. This has been the Powermatic 2 cigarette injector, and we will see you in the very next video. Thanks for watching.